Okay po, Doc. Thank you.
Okay, so there, can you see my slide?
Yes po, Doc.
How about my audio? Is it clear?
Yes po, Doc. Clear naman po.
Okay, so thank you. So good morning, Section B. My name is Dr. Ferdinand Bernal. Okay, so I'm a practicing orthopedic and spine surgeon. So for this morning, our topic is hematologic principles in surgery. So the lecture was taken from your textbook, your Swartz 11th edition. So I think this is chapter 4. Okay, so if you want to have a more comprehensive reading of the topic, you just refer to your textbook. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so what is hemostasis? Okay, so this is a complex process whose function is to limit blood loss from an injured vessel. Okay, so you need an injury, that's the triggering factor. Okay, so in hemostasis, there are main players or actors, that act to prevent blood loss. These are your platelets, your endothelium, and the circulating coagulation factors. Okay, so your platelets, they form a plug. Okay, so they release different chemicals, to act or attract other cells at the site of injury. Your endothelium, they also secrete different enzymes and chemicals which aids in your hemostasis by vasoconstricting the vessels, aggregating the platelets, and also with the perfusion. Okay, so they also secrete chemicals which leads to fibrinolysis or dissolution of the blood clot. And of course, your coagulation factors, which leads to fibrin as the byproduct or the end product. Okay. Okay, here you can see the schematic representation of your hemostasis. Okay, so there are 4 process. Okay, so the number 1 is your vascular phase. Okay, that's your vasoconstriction. That is the initial response to injury. Once you have an injury to your blood vessel, the immediate response will be a vasoconstriction of that vessel to prevent further blood loss. Okay. Number 2, once you have an injury to the blood vessel, the subendothelial collagen is exposed. No, this is a attractant to your platelets. So platelets are attracted and they aggregate at the site of injury, so forming a platelet plug. Okay, so it's like cork stopper, no? This will prevent further blood loss at the site of injury. Okay? So you have your vasoconstriction followed by platelet plug formation or platelet aggregation. That's the platelet phase. Okay, so the number 3 step is once the platelets are attracted at the site of injury, they will release different chemicals and enzymes. Once they are released, this will attract other platelets at the site of injury. At the same time, this will activate your coagulation pathway, no? So this time, your circulating coagulation factors is involved, okay? So once they are involved, as I have mentioned, the end product of your coagulation pathway is your fibrin, okay? So you can see in the picture what this fibrin does is it compacts the platelet or it holds it, binds it, no, by forming a mesh. So the blood, your blood clot is now formed and they are more durable as compared to your platelet plug. Okay, so the difference is in number 2, you have a plug formation, meaning to say the platelets just aggregated, no, at the site of injury and they adhere to the injured vessel, no. With the aid of your fibrin, this now acts, no, as a mesh or a glue, no, holding the platelets together. This now your blood clot, no, it's more durable. Okay, so it further strengthened the initial platelet plug formation. Okay, so by way of your coagulation pathway. So your coagulation pathway has 2 arms, the intrinsic and the extrinsic arm. Okay, so we will be discussing that in the succeeding slides. And finally, number 4, you have your fibrinolysis. Okay, so your fibrinolysis is important, no, for reperfusion. Okay, so once the blood vessel or the organ has healed, chemicals, no, that are intended to lyse the clot are released. Actually, your fibrinolysis is initiated at the same time as your clot forms. Okay, so that's a sort of a check and balance. Okay, so you cannot have both just one function dominating the blood clot formation. No, the balance there is your fibrinolysis or your fibrinolytic chemicals are also triggered and released, not to prevent excessive clot formation. Okay. Okay, so as I have mentioned, vasoconstriction, that's the initial response to vessel injury. It's more pronounced in vessels with medial smooth muscles. Okay, like your arteries. Okay, so of course your vein, no, compared to your artery has a medial smooth muscle. Okay, so however, for large caliber blood vessels or arteries, no, this may not hold true. It's difficult. Okay, so this only holds true to your small arteries. Okay, so the vasoconstriction. Okay. So once your blood vessel is injured, okay, so your platelets are aggregates at the site, and once they aggregate at the sites, they are activated. Okay, so these are the chemicals that are released at the site of injury. The most important of which is your thromboxane A2. So this comes from the platelet membrane by way of your arachidonic acid pathway. Okay, so this is just one of the uh, byproduct of that arachidonic acid pathway. There are other prostaglandins that are also released that also acts as vasoconstrictors and vasodilators. Okay, so one important byproduct of that pathway is your thromboxane A2. So this acts both as a vasoconstrictor and it attracts other platelets at the site of injury. Okay. You also have your endothelin and 5-hydroxytryptamine. So your endothelin is released by your endothelial cells or coming from the endothelium. So this is also, these two chemicals are also vasoconstrictors. Okay. So serotonin are also released during platelet aggregation. No, serotonin and ADP, they are the principal aggregators of platelet, no, at the site of injury. You also have your bradykinin and fibrinopeptides. These chemicals uh, acts, no, to uh, cause your smooth muscles, no, medial smooth muscles of the blood vessels to constrict. So they are vasoconstrictors. Okay, so again, your vasoconstriction is more pronounced in your arteries, no? But small to medium size is the ones that can go with vasoconstriction. The bigger vessels, the bigger arteries, they cannot really vasoconstrict. For example, your aorta or your big branch of your arteries, no, they cannot constrict to prevent. Okay, but in a way, no, they can the platelets can adhere to the site, but that depends on the amount of injury to the vessel. Okay, in some instances, when you, the character of injury to the vessel also affects vasoconstriction. Okay, so if you have a ligated or cut an artery, uh, it's more optimum for them to go into vasoconstriction compared to lateral slit. Okay, if you can imagine. Okay, however, there are different processes, no, to prevent that uh, uh, blood loss, no, by way of your hemostasis. Okay, so moving on, platelets, they are nucleate fragments of your megakaryocyte. No, your megakaryocyte is the parent cell coming from the bone marrow. Okay, so the normal circulating volume of your platelet is 150,000 to 400,000 per microliter. 30% of your platelet is sequestered in the spleen if they do not participate in the hemostatic process. Okay, so that's the how the cycle, no, the life cycle of your platelet. The average lifespan is 7 to 10 days. Okay, so this is diagram just showing a normal platelet, no, with the different receptors located on their membrane. They don't have a nucleus, but they have granules and organelles inside, no, also releasing different chemicals. Okay, so this is your platelet. So from a resting platelet to an activated platelet. Once they are activated, the cell membrane changes shape. Uh, this will allow passage of chemicals, no, especially your calcium and clotting factors to bind to your platelet. Your platelet plays an integral role in hemostasis by forming a hemostatic plug, as I mentioned, no, the number 2 step, and thrombin formation. Okay, so your thrombin is important for cleavage of your fibrinogen into fibrin. No, platelets do not normally adhere to each other or to the vessel wall under physiologic circumstances. During your primary hemostasis, there is injury to the intimal layer of the blood vessel, no? So as I mentioned, this exposes the subendothelial collagen. That is the triggering factor. Once this subendothelial collagen is exposed, these platelets are attracted. Okay, so once they are attracted, they will adhere to that exposed subendothelial collagen. Okay, of course, blood clot will eventually be formed. Okay, so that's why those patients who are hypertensive, they have of course they have an increase in their blood pressure. When you have an increased blood pressure, that damages the subendothelial layer of the blood vessel, and when it's damaged, eventually that subendothelial collagen will be exposed, and they are prone to develop blood clots like clot formation secondary from atherosclerosis and everything, no? So they are prone for cardiac problem and stroke, no? That's how it develops. That is why among those patients, even blood thinners, no, to prevent clot formation. Okay, so your von Willebrand factor, no, that's very important. Present in your that's a proteins present in your subendothelium. It binds to the glycoprotein 195 receptor that is present in your platelet membrane. No, I have shown you a while ago the platelet with a different receptor located on the membrane, and one of that receptor is the glycoprotein 195. That is specific for von Willebrand factor. Okay, your platelet initiates a release reaction recruiting other platelets, no, at the site of injury. So in your primary hemostasis, platelet aggregation is reversible and not associated with secretion. Heparin will not interfere in your primary hemostasis. So for those patients who are on heparin or being given heparin, as an anticoagulant, your primary hemostasis can still happen, no? The platelet plug formation. Okay, so as I mentioned, ADP and serotonin are the principal mediators, no? Okay. Moving on, during the second wave of platelet aggregation, a release reaction occurs. So your ADP, calcium, fibrinogen, thromboxane A2, no? These chemicals are released. Fibrinogen is a required cofactor acting as a bridge for your glycoprotein 2B3A receptor. Okay, so your fibrinogen is specific for the 2B3A receptor. So when this happens, this is the number 3 step, no, the clot formation. Okay, So it is now irreversible. Okay, so your platelet plug formation is still reversible. Now, when we move to the number 3, which is your clot formation, that now becomes irreversible. So, thrombospondin, no, this is a protein secreted by the granules coming from the platelet. So they strengthen platelet interaction and fibrinogen binding. No? So they aid, no? They further strengthen the platelet to platelet interaction and fibrinogen binding. Okay. Platelet factor 4 and alpha thromboglobulin are also released. They act as a heparin antagonist. Okay. Alteration. Okay, so in the platelet membrane, so I've shown you, no, the picture, no, the platelet becomes activated and changes the shape of the membrane. Okay, so when this happens, it allows calcium and clotting factors to bind, no? Sometimes called platelet factor 3. So when this happens, when your platelet is activated, it converts prothrombin to thrombin. Okay, so that's why we have mentioned, no, aside from the platelet plug formation or adhesion, they also aids in thrombin formation. Okay, so this thrombin together with your this thrombin is activated by your factor 10A together with factor 5 and calcium. Okay? So yun na tayo, nasa number 3 na tayo, no? So do you have any question at this point? Clear ba? Clear?
Yes po, Doc.
Yes po, Doc.
Okay, so let's move to okay, so this is still part of number 3, the coagulation process, no? This is the pathway, the extrinsic and the intrinsic. So when you say extrinsic, from the word extrinsic, outside, no? So there is injury, vascular injury. Okay, so when you have vascular injury, no, what we have mentioned, tissue factor is released, no? They form a complex with factor 7. Okay, so leading to the cascade until factor 10. Your factor 10A, that's the factor 10, that's your what do you call this, the common pathway. Okay, so that's the common pathway, the factor 1010A. This is where your extrinsic and intrinsic meets. Okay, in intrinsic pathway, as compared to your extrinsic, there is no vascular injury. All the factors are intrinsic. Okay, beginning with factor 12, no, factor 11, 8, 9, until it leads to factor 10. Okay, so you can see, you just analyze the diagram. Okay, so with the extrinsic, there's vascular injury, tissue factor release combines with factor 7, forming the complex, activates factor 10, no, to 10A. Okay, so that's the once they reach the common pathway, no, from factor 10A, no, that's the one that we have just mentioned, together with your factor 5A and calcium, they convert your prothrombin or factor 2 into thrombin or factor 2A. Okay? Now, this thrombin is important, no? Because that is the one cleaving or converting your fibrinogen into fibrin, which is the final product, your fibrin now acts as a mesh holding your blood clot. Okay, so there are three processes: the initiation, amplification, and propagation. Tissue exposure following subendothelial injury leads to binds to factor 7A, catalyzing activation of 10 to 10A. No, the subletter is just to indicate that it is activated. Okay, so 10 becomes 10A, so mean to say is activated. 9 to 9A. No, so that's your prothrombinase complex 10 A, 9A, 5A. Okay, platelets adhere to extracellular matrix components at the site of injury. Okay, so your factor 8A, 9A, and 5A, 10A are assembled on the surfaces of activated platelets, forming a thrombin burst. Okay. So factor 5A, 9A is 50 times more effective at catalyzing factor 10 than tissue factor 7A. Okay. Thrombin cleaves fibrinogen by two cleavage steps, no, facilitated by your TAFI or thrombin activatable fibrinolysis inhibitor, stabilizing the clot. Well, all these statements are just for memorization, and you just have to read them, no, in your textbook. Okay, so it just tells us that these complexes are how they act and which one is more better compared to the other. Okay, so you just read that, no, for examination purposes. I don't see any importance of these factor complexes. Okay, now for your fibrin polymerization, so beginning with your fibrinogen, no, as we have mentioned, they are acted upon by your thrombin. Okay, so it forms fibrin monomer, and peptides, no, fibrinopeptide A and fibrinopeptide B. Okay, so once your thrombin acts on your fibrinogen, this fibrinogen is cleaved into fibrin and two peptides, fibrinopeptide A and fibrinopeptide B. Okay, so removing fibrinopeptide A, this will allow end-to-end polymerization or end-to-end binding. Okay, removal of fibrinopeptide B, this will allow side-to-side polymerization or side-to-side binding. Okay, so from a monomer, your fibrin, once it binds, no, you have removed the fibrinopeptides A and B, it binds end-to-end and side-to-side, you now form the mesh. Okay, so that's now your fibrin polymer. Okay, so once you have formed that, remember in the number 3 step, that is the one now which will hold the initial platelet plug formation and form the blood clot. Okay, so once you have reached that, we have mentioned that's now it's more durable and the process is irreversible. Okay, so there are different drugs, no, that can affect your hemostasis. Okay, so you give for example your aspirin, no, your aspirin from your pharmacology, it irreversibly blocks your cyclooxygenase enzyme, no? So preventing progression of your arachidonic acid pathway. Okay, so also your selective COX-2 inhibitors, no, they are selective. Also your other drugs, your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, no, they act, no, they can prevent progression from the primary hemostasis to the second wave. Okay. Okay, so now this is the fourth step. So this is the last step of your hemostasis, no? Feedback inhibition. So we have mentioned, no? I have mentioned that your fibrinolysis begins at the same time as your clot is being formed. So it's like a check and balance. This is by way of feedback inhibition on the coagulation cascade. Some of these are the chemicals, no, that are released, no, and aids with your fibrinolysis. Your thrombomodulin is presented by the endothelium. No? It comes from the endothelium. This is a protein, and it acts as a thrombin sink. So what do you mean by that? So your thrombomodulin binds with your thrombin. So once they bind with the circulating thrombin, it forms a complex with that thrombin. So once they form a complex, this thrombin will now be not available to cleave your fibrinogen into fibrin because it is already bound to your thrombomodulin. Okay, so that's how this protein prevents progression of your coagulation pathway, no, to the final product, which is your fibrin. Okay, so it makes your thrombin unavailable, no, to participate in the process. Okay, your protein C, no, which comes from the liver, is also released. It inhibits factor 5 and factor 8. Okay, so these factor 5 and factor 8 are important factors involved in your coagulation pathway. Remember that your factor 5 together with calcium and factor 10A, they are the ones converting your prothrombin and to thrombin. Okay, so without them, that complex becomes inefficient. Tissue plasminogen activator is also released from the endothelium following injury. Okay, so tissue plasminogen activator, meaning to say this substance or chemical activates your plasminogen into plasmin. Okay, so the role of plasmin, it acts on the blood clot, no, to dissolve the fibrin polymers, no. Your APC, so this is your it's just an acronym, meaning to say activated protein C. Your protein C inhibits factor 5 and 8. Your activated protein C consumes your plasminogen activator inhibitor 1. Okay, so that chemical also acts, no, helps in your fibrinolysis. AT3 or antithrombin 3 neutralizes all of the serine proteases. Tissue factor pathway inhibitor blocks your tissue factor 7A complex, reducing production of factor 10, and 9A. Okay, so there are different chemicals and substances also released in your hemostasis, which acts or helps in clot clot dissolution or clot propagation or formation of clot. Okay, so these are the most important of this is your APC system. Okay, this is the most potent system of thrombin inhibition, the APC. Factor V Leiden, this is a mutation, no? This is a genetic mutation in your factor V. So it's termed factor V Leiden. So if you have a mutated factor V, which is factor V Leiden, your APC or protein C cannot deactivate that factor V. It's resistant to cleavage by APC. So these patients are prone for venous thromboembolic events, no? Because they will still proceed with the clot formation because they are resistant to your activated protein C. Okay, so clear ba? You just have to read this again, no? So I think, no, medyo you have to yeah, it's for ano this slide is for memorization, no? It's difficult to, I don't know how will you understand it except for memorizing. Okay. So any questions at this point? Clear ba?
Yes, Doc.
Okay, so you just again, and it's in the textbook. You just have to read it again later or tonight. Okay, so to retain what we have discussed. With your fibrinolysis, okay, so as we have mentioned, this will allow restoration of blood flow begins at the same time as clot is being formed. It is directed by your circulating kinases, tissue activators, and kallikrein in the vascular endothelium. TPA, synthesized by endothelial cells, released on thrombin stimulation. No? So you can see from here, the different byproduct, no? For example, thrombin, which is important for cleaving fibrinogen into fibrin. They also triggers the release of your chemicals, no, which is necessary for the dissolution of the product that they form, no. For example, the clot or the fibrin, no. So in that way, you have a balance. No? These substances are not merely for clot formation, but at the same time they also form or release substances to restore, no, blood flow that area. Okay, so that's the physiology, no. Okay, so both TPA and plasminogen binds to fibrin as it forms. Okay, so fibrin, the end product, no, that once it is formed, okay, so your TPA, no, released by the endothelial cells, and the plasminogen, okay, binds to that fibrin. Okay, so that is important because meaning to say that this will become selective. So the word selective is important because these chemicals will only act on the site of injury. Okay, so the fibrin that was formed at the site of injury is bound by this TPA and plasminogen. So they become selective. No, it only acts at the site of injury. Okay, so that also prevents excessive fibrinolysis, no, all over the body. No? That is what they mean. Okay, so it is only selective, no, at the site of injury. Okay. Fibrin polymers are degraded by plasmin. Okay. So once the fibrin polymers, no, the is degraded by plasmin, it yields fibrin degradation products. These are your D-dimers and E-nodules. Okay? So this is the FDPs or fibrin degradation products. Okay, so these fibrin degradation products, is the byproduct, so it increases in some disease states or some condition wherein there is excessive fibrinolysis, so we will be going on that, in the succeeding slides. There are disease states which leads to excessive fibrinolysis. Okay, so plasmin is inhibited by your alpha-2 antiplasmin cross-linked to fibrin by factor 13. Okay, so your factor 13 is also important because it's like a stabilizer, it stabilizes the clot, by way of this antiplasmin, because your plasmin, as we know, they are the ones responsible for degrading the fibrin mesh or the clot. This factor 13, they aid, presenting antiplasmin at the site. Okay, so preventing early dissolution, or destruction of the clot. Also, okay, so this is your again how fibrinolysis happens, from the fibrin polymer. It is degraded, you have your E-nodules and D-dimer. Okay, so the bigger fragment of your fibrin degradation product, they can be incorporated back into your blood clot, into your fibrin polymers. But when that happens, that clot is not as durable as a normal or original blood clot. They are prone for, they are unstable, and they are prone for early lysis. Okay, the smaller fragments, they also prevent platelet aggregation. Okay, so when you have excessive fibrin degradation product due to excessive fibrinolysis, that will happen. So it will be a cascade, cascade of event, So once that happens, excessive fibrinolysis or bleeding can happen. Okay, so let's go to your factors. Factor 8 deficiency, hemophilia A and hemophilia B, they are the most common. So these these are sex-linked recessive trait disorder, no? Meaning to say they are almost exclusively among the male population. Okay. So you have severe, moderately severe, and mild disease. If it's less than 1%, meaning to say the circulating factor, that's a severe disease. And when you have a severe disease, you can have spontaneous, no, that you can have spontaneous bleeding. Okay, so without any antecedent trauma, you can have spontaneous bleeding. You can have spontaneous bleeding in your inside the joints, making ambulation very painful or difficult or close to impossible. If that happens, you can have bleeding inside your organ, muscles, or tissue. So anywhere in your body, you can have spontaneous bleeding, and you can die, no? If you have a severe disease. For the moderately severe, you don't have spontaneous bleeding. However, during trauma or surgery, you can bleed excessively. Okay? For the mild disease, they don't have excessive bleeding during trauma or surgery. Okay, so that's the difference depending on the amount of circulating factors inside your body. Factor 11 deficiencies, also sometimes called hemophilia C. Spontaneous bleeding is rare. It is prevalent among Ashkenazi Jewish population. Your von Willebrand's disease, the most congenital bleeding disorder, you can have easy mucosal bleeding and bruising. It can be either due to a quantitative or qualitative defect of your von Willebrand factor. Okay, so remember, as we have mentioned, the von Willebrand factor is an important protein present in the subendothelium, which is necessary for platelet adhesion and for carrying your factor 8. Okay, your VWF is specific for the glycoprotein receptor 195 in your platelet membrane. Okay, so these are the types 1, 2, 3, quantitative, qualitative, or total deficiency. Type 1, quantitative, meaning there's a decrease. Type 2, you can have a normal number, but it is defective. That's what it means. Then total deficiency. For factors 2, 5, and 10, this is a rare disease. It is an inherited autosomal recessive disorder. Factor 5 deficiency may be co-inherited with factor 8 deficiency. Treatment is by giving fresh frozen plasma. For the factor 7 deficiency, it's also a rare autosomal recessive. Spontaneous bleeding is uncommon. Easy bruising and mucosal bleeding can happen. Post-operative bleeding in 30% of surgical procedures can happen. No? You can give FFP or recombinant factor 7A. For the factor 13 deficiency, remember factor 13 responsible for cross-linking with your alpha-2 antiplasmin. No? Antiplasmin, meaning to say prevents the plasmin from degrading the blood clot easily. Okay, so when it is absent, you can that process is affected. So you can have associated. It is associated with severe bleeding diathesis. It can be associated with inflammatory bowel disease, hepatic failure, and myeloid leukemia. So bleeding is delayed. So you can still form a clot, but the clot is also unstable. That's why bleeding is delayed. There's a risk for intracranial bleeding and spontaneous abortion. Okay, so moving on. So with your platelets, you can have functional defects in your platelet. Generally, if they are affected, the surface membranes of proteins of the platelet, enzymatic defect, and granules. Okay, so those are the one being affected if you have a dysfunctional platelet. Okay, so number one, yeah, the surface protein abnormality. So you have two conditions wherein the surface protein is affected. Okay, so you have your Glanzmann thrombasthenia. Oh, yeah. It is a rare autosomal recessive disorder. Okay, so when you have a Glanzmann thrombasthenia, the glycoprotein 2B3A receptor is lacking or dysfunctional. Okay, so remember that this 2B3A receptor is responsible for your fibrinogen binding. Okay? So when this is absent, there will be a faulty platelet aggregation and subsequent bleeding. So you can treat by giving platelet transfusion. Another surface protein abnormality is your Bernard-Soulier syndrome. So when you have a Bernard-Soulier syndrome, there's a defect in your glycoprotein 1B95 receptor for your von Willebrand factor. Okay? So there will be, so remember that your von Willebrand factor is responsible for platelet adhesions. No? They are present in the subenthelium. And when your receptor, no, that is specific for the von Willebrand factor is defective in your platelet, of course they cannot bind and you prevent that process. Okay, so there will be a failure of platelet adhesion. You can give platelet transfusions for treatment. Okay, so the storage pool disease, no, affectation of your platelet granules. The most common is loss of dense granules. Inside these granules, these dense granules or alpha granules, there are chemicals present. Okay? Chemicals or substances or proteins present inside, which also helps in your hemostatic process. So loss of dense granules is most prevalent among the most common. Okay? It is commonly seen in Hermansky-Pudlak syndrome. Okay, so those are for the functional defect. Now, let's go to failure of production. Okay, so meaning to say there is less circulating platelets inside the body. So this can be due to leukemia, myeloproliferative disorders, B12 or folate deficiencies, patients who are on chemo and radio therapy, no, because if you are undergoing chemo or radio, so these drugs, no, it kills your body, no, so not sparing your blood cells or platelets. Okay, alcohol intoxication, viral infection. Okay, so such as most commonly here in the Philippines is your dengue, no? It affects your platelet. So decreased platelet can also be due to decreased survival. So it can be immune mediated. It can be secondary to your DIC or disseminated intravascular coagulation, or related to platelet thrombi. And those are the different diseases that goes with it. So so idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura or ITP, no? The characteristics of ITP is they are acute, short-lived, and typically follows a viral illness among children. For the adult, they are gradual in onset, chronic, and with no identifiable cause. That's the difference. There's impaired platelet production and T-cell mediated immune response with your ITP. So this is the treatment for your ITP. You have your first line, second line, third line. Okay? So your HIT or your heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. So this is also an immune-mediated destruction of platelet. It is a sort of hypersensitivity or drug-induced formation of antibody against the platelet. So your platelet count falls 5 to 7 days after heparin is started, or 1 to 2 days after re-exposure. Okay? The blood picture is that platelet count falls below 100,000 or drops by 50% from the baseline. Thrombocytopenia and intravascular thrombosis develops. Their absence of thrombocytopenia does not preclude the diagnosis. Okay? So meaning to say, even though you have a normal circulating platelet, no, that does not preclude the diagnosis of HIT. A negative ELISA rules out HIT. However, a positive result does not confirm HIT. So the treatment is to stop the heparin and give alternative anticoagulant aside from heparin. So you can give, there are a lot of other anticoagulants available. Okay, the factor 10A inhibitors, the warfarin, no? So those class of drugs, so you can give. Okay, so thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura results from activation of platelet and formation of thrombi. So large VWF molecules interact with platelets. So the blood picture, you can have thrombocytopenia, microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, fever, renal and neurologic symptoms. So this is the clinical presentation. If you get a blood smear, you can see schistocytes, no, in the blood smear. This will aid in the diagnosis. You can give fresh frozen plasma and rituximab as treatment. Your hemolytic uremic syndromes, it can be secondary to E. coli, no? This strain of E. coli, the 0157H7. You can see a renal failure with this syndrome. However, neurologic symptoms are less frequent. Your metalloproteinase is also normal. no, as compared to your TTP. HIV, SLE, and certain drugs, no, such as triclopidine, mitomycin C, gemcitabine, can develop features of your TTP and HUS. Okay? So these conditions, no, can present both as TTP and HUS. Okay, so another factor that can decrease the circulating platelet is sequestration. Can be due to portal hypertension, sarcoid, lymphoma, or Gaucher's disease. Total body platelet mass is normal. Okay? Bleeding is less than anticipated because sequestered platelet can be mobilized back into the circulation. Okay, so the sequestered platelets inside your spleen, no, they can be mobilized back and thrown into the circulation to aid in your hemostasis. If you give platelet concentrate or platelet transfusion, platelet count does not increase as much. Okay, so because when among these patients, the transfused platelets is just sequestered back into the spleen. Okay, that's why the count does not increase as much. Okay, but yeah, when the need comes, no, the sequestered platelets inside the spleen can be mobilized back into the circulation. Okay, so that's the good side naman. Okay, so for the qualitative disorders, it can be due to massive transfusion, therapeutic platelet inhibitors, and certain disease states. Okay. So meaning to say you have a normal amount of platelet in the circulation, but they are defective, no? So these are the conditions wherein you can have that massive transfusion, therapeutic platelet inhibitors, meaning to say your patient is in the taking drugs, no? For example, your oral anticoagulants, aspirin, clopidogrel, no, those can affect the platelet function. Disease states, no? This disease, liver, monoclonal gammopathies, and myeloproliferative disorder. Okay. With your disseminated intravascular coagulation, this is an acquired syndrome characterized by activation of coagulation pathway. So acquired, meaning to say there is a causative mechanism. Okay. So when you have DIC, there is excessive thrombin generation and diffuse formation of microthrombi. Okay? So excessive amount of thrombin is formed inside the body and diffuse formation of microthrombi. Okay, so remember, no, as we have mentioned, your hemostasis or coagulation, they act as a check and balance. No? Once the blood clot is being formed, chemicals for fibrinolysis are also being released at the same time. Okay, so when this happens, so excessive thrombin, so consumption of platelets So because more blood clots will be formed, there will also be depletion of coagulation factors due to their participation in that excessive process. And when that happens, your platelets are consumed, your coagulation factors are consumed, you can now have bleeding. Okay? Because your platelets and coagulation factors are already deficient, or consumed. So the next step, or the next thing that can happen is bleeding. Okay? So that's the cascade of event, if you have DIC. Presence of an underlying condition is required. Okay, so these are the common causes of your DIC. Okay? You just read that na lang sa book. For the diagnosis, there should be an inciting etiology. There should be thrombocytopenia. There should be prolongation of prothrombin time, low fibrinogen level, elevated FDPs, or your fibrin degradation products. Okay? So as we have mentioned, your FDPs or fibrin degradation products, they can be incorporated back into the formation of blood clot. However, when they are incorporated back, that clot is unstable and prone to bleed. So it's like a vicious cycle. Okay? So you have more thrombin formation and eventually fibrin formation. Then you have excessive lysis, due to consumption of the platelets and coagulation factors. So you have more FDPs, which are again incorporated back into the blood clot, which is unstable. So it easily bleeds, So you can see the vicious cycle. That's why when you have DIC, you will bleed. You will bleed to death and lead to multiple organ failure. Okay, so that's the explanation. So for the treatment, once you have identified the causative mechanism, so your initial step is to relieve that cause right away. Okay? Maintain adequate perfusion. So, of course, you have to replace what was lost. Maybe the patient bled, or very low platelet, very low fibrinogen, very low coagulation factor, you have to replace. Okay? So to maintain adequate perfusion. Okay? You can also give heparin for the excessive clot formation. Okay, so primary fibrinolysis, this is an acquired hypofibrinogenic state. Can be secondary to prostate resection and extracorporeal bypass. Severity, so when you those patients undergoing prostate resection and extracorporeal bypass, so they release a byproduct and leads to this hypofibrinogenic state. Okay. Antifibrinolytic agents may be used, such as your alpha amino caproic acid and tranexamic acid. Polycythemia vera, There's an increased blood viscosity due to increased blood cells, no? Increased platelet count, increased hematocrit, okay? So there's an increased tendency towards stasis. So you can give low-dose aspirin, you can do phlebotomy, you can also give hydroxyurea. Okay, so patients who have liver disease, they have a disturbance in the coagulation mechanism. So they are prone for increased bleeding and thrombosis. Okay, they are both hypercoagulable and hypocoagulable. Okay, increased bleeding. At the same time, there's also increased thrombosis. Okay, those are for patients who have liver problem. So your thrombocytopenia can be due to hypersplenism. This is in patients with liver disease. The thrombocytopenia can be due to the hypersplenism that goes with your liver problem. Reduced production of thrombopoietin, because thrombopoietin is produced by the liver. Immune-mediated destruction, secondary to biliary cirrhosis and hepatitis C. For the hypercoagulable state, there's decreased production of protein C and S. Okay, so remember that your high protein C, no, the activated protein C is the most potent chemical, no, that helps with your fibrinolysis, no, because it inactivates the factor 5 and factor 8. Okay, so if they are not present, so less help, no, to aid in your fibrinolysis. So you go into a hypercoagulable state. Okay, so there is decreased antithrombin and plasminogen, elevated von Willebrand factor and factor 8. Okay, so remember that von Willebrand factor and factor 8 important for platelet adhesion. Liver disease can also have a hypocoagulable state due to decreased production of coagulation factors, decreased absorption of vitamin K. So when you have decreased vitamin K, you have the vitamin K dependent factors, no? Your 2, 7, 9, 10. Tama ba? 2, 5, 7, 2, 7, 9, 10. 2, 7, 9, 10. So those 4 factors are affected, no? So if you have less of that 2, 7, 9, 10, then expectedly you can go into a hypocoagulable state. So there's also decreased production of thrombopoietin, immune-mediated thrombocytopenia, and hypersplenism. Okay, so for the trauma-induced coagulopathy, this is a shock and tissue injury are the initiating factors. Activated protein C mediated clotting factor, the activation. Endothelial injury and auto-heparinization happens, no, due to shedding of heparin sulfate and chondroitin sulfate. Platelet dysfunction and fibrinolysis happens. Hemorrhagic shock is not a necessary component of your trauma-induced coagulopathy. Okay? Previously, it was thought of as a necessary component, but in patients who have traumatic brain injury and pulmonary contusions, they don't present with hemorrhagic shock. That's why hemorrhagic shock was eliminated. So this is just a diagram showing to you how your TIC develops, no? You have platelet activation, increased levels of catecholamines, no? Autoheparinization, endothelial activation. Okay, so there's a platelet dysfunction, decreased factor activity, hyperfibrinolysis. Okay, and eventually bleeding. Okay, so do you have any questions at this point? Masyado bang madami?
None po, Doc.
Okay, sige. So you just read na lang, ha? Nandun naman sa textbook. Okay, so antiphospholipid syndrome, this is the most common acquired coagulation inhibitor. It includes your lupus anticoagulant and anti-cardiolipin antibodies associated with venous or arterial thrombosis. Okay. Antiphospholipid antibodies are common in patients with systemic lupus and in RA. Antiphospholipid antibodies are common in patients with systemic lupus but can also be seen in RA and Sjogren's syndrome. The hallmark is a prolonged APTT in vitro and increased thrombosis in vivo. Okay, let's go to anticoagulation and bleeding. Okay, so these are the different anticoagulants that we give, no? The heparin, warfarin, factor 10A inhibitors. Your factor 10A inhibitors includes rivaroxaban, apixaban, edoxaban. No? So these are the most commonly given here. No, apixaban is available. The one I commonly use in my practice if I have to give a factor 10A inhibitor. And more newer drug, no, the thrombin inhibitors. No? Okay, so warfarin can be used for long-term anticoagulation. Some patients may need long-term anticoagulation due to some disease states. No? For example, those patients who have a cardiac problem or who have undergone cardiac surgery like valve replacement with prosthetic valves, they need to be on prolonged anticoagulants. That's why you can give warfarin. Okay? But remember, some drugs, they can act, no? With your warfarin, no? Some can be synergistic, no? I mean to say it can potentiate the effect of warfarin. Okay, for those who lessen the effects of warfarin, you have your barbiturates, oral contraceptives, estrogen-containing compounds, corticosteroid, adrenocorticotropic hormone. So these drugs or compounds, they lessen the effect of warfarin. So meaning to say, if they are lessened, you may need to increase the dosage, no, to achieve the desired effect. Your phenylbutazone, clofibrate, anabolic steroids, L-thyroxine, glucagons, amiodarone, quinidine, cephalosporins. Cephalosporins, these antibiotics are commonly used, no, especially in our practice of surgery. No? We give oral antibiotics and the most commonly given is the cephalosporins. So patients taking this, no, they can have an increased effect of warfarin. Okay, so you might need to decrease the dosage. Okay. So bleeding complications secondary to your anticoagulants can lead to hematuria, soft tissue bleeding, intracerebral bleeding, skin necrosis, and abdominal bleeding. So you can give vitamin K, no, for patients who are on warfarin. Okay, so the remedy or antidote, you can give vitamin K or a prothrombin complex concentrate. Okay, for those patients who are on factor 10A inhibitor like your apixaban, you can give andexanet alpha or siraparantag. For those patients who are on heparin, you can, the antidote is protamine sulfate. You just have to ask if they have allergies to fish, no, because patients who are on with allergies to fish can have a hypersensitivity reaction to protamine sulfate. APTT of less than 1.3%, control in heparinized patient, and INR less than 1.5 times in patients on warfarin can undergo surgery safely. So eye and brain surgery should not be performed among patients who are on anticoagulant, no, because of catastrophic effect, no, if bleeding happens. Okay, so these two organs, no, they are very prone for increased since they are in an enclosed space, no, the eye or the brain or the spinal cord. If you have bleeding inside that, there will be increased pressure, and when you have an increased pressure, it can damage the neural structure, the neural tissues. So in your brain, you can compress the brain and or the spinal cord, and can lead to paralysis, leading to permanent damage. Inside your eye, you can compress the optic nerve or the retina, no, leading to permanent blindness, no. That's the danger. Okay, so here are some of the ways that we perform or we can prevent excessive bleeding during surgery. Local hemostasis, mechanical procedures, thermal agents. No, these are some of the steps that we employ during surgery. Okay. Ideal hemostatic agents. So here are some hemostatic agents that we use. You have your gelatin foam, oxidized cellulose, microfibrillaire collagen. So we use this a lot for me, in spine surgery. Okay? Because in spine surgery, of course, you cannot do digital pressure or press, no, the spinal cord, because that's very sensitive. That's a very sensitive structure and can lead to paralysis. Okay, so we just put this foam or cellulose, no, to prevent bleeding. So it's like a platelet plug or a blood clot, no, it forms a clot. Okay. You have your biologic agents, your thrombin, fibrin sealants, and platelet sealants also available. Okay, so moving to blood transfusion. Human blood replacement therapy was accepted in the late 19th century. Lance Steiner identified the major ABO 1900. Levine and Stetson followed with the concept of RH grouping. Whole blood was considered the standard until in the 1970s, wherein component therapy gained prominence. So until the 1970s, they used to transfuse whole blood. Okay, so in the 1970s, the PAC-RBC, the fresh frozen plasma, the platelet concentrate was started. Okay, so you need to undergo cross-matching for blood transfusion. Major cross-matching is performed. So meaning to say the recipient's blood sera is matched with the donor's RBC if they will react. Rh negative should only be transfused with Rh negative blood. Why? Because of especially among childbearing age in among women. Okay, because if they are given an Rh positive blood, they will form an antibody, and when they get pregnant, it can kill the fetus. No, that's why. In emergency situation, type O negative RBC and AB plasma may be transfused. Okay, so in emergency situation, this is not routine. Okay, in patients with clinically significant cold agglutinins, blood warmer should be used to prevent hypersensitivity or a hypersensitive reaction. Cross-matching should always be done before administration of dextran. For the autologous transfusion, these are the requirements. Some patients who are not allowed to receive blood transfusion, like certain religious sect, they would rather die, no, than to receive blood transfusion. They can do autologous transfusion, meaning to say they donate their own blood, and during the time of the surgery, they can use that. Okay, so up to 5 units can be donated. Okay. Your bank full blood, the shelf life is 42 days. These are the changes that happens in your bank blood. There's a reduction of intracellular ADP and 2,3-DPG. So they are important for the oxygen carrying capacity or the oxygenation. So if they are affected, the oxygen carrying capacity of the RBC is also affected. Stored RBCs become progressively acidotic due to increased lactate, potassium, and ammonia. Your your frozen red blood cell can be stored for 10 years at negative 80 degrees centigrade. Okay, so you can use for patients that were previously sensitized. So this is also a form of autologous transfusion. So they can donate their own blood and store it at least for for as long as 10 years. No? So ATP, the advantage is that ATP and 2,3-DPG are maintained with your frozen RBC. Leukocyte reduced wash red blood cells, prevents almost all febrile non-hemolytic transfusion reaction, including alloimmunization to HLA class 1 antigen, platelet transfusion refractoriness, and cytomegalovirus. Your platelet concentrate, the shelf life is 5 days or 120 hours, capable of transfusing infectious diseases because they are stored at room temperature. So among the blood components being transfused, your platelet concentrate is the one more prone for bacterial contamination. Fresh frozen plasma, the shelf life is 2 years at negative 18 degrees centigrade. This is a good source of vitamin K dependent factor 5. Once thawed it can only be stored for 5 days at 2 to 4 degrees centigrade. The indications for blood transfusion are the following: improvement in oxygen carrying capacity, treatment of anemia, volume replacement in surgical patient. For the damage control resuscitation, start resuscitation with crystalloid followed by PAC-RBC. The three basic components of damage control resuscitation includes permissive hypotension, minimizing crystalloid and colloid-based resuscitation, and giving a balanced ratio of blood products. That's the three basic components. So these are the indications for giving fresh frozen plasma, platelets, and cryoprecipitate. You just read that in your book. So the ideal ratio is 1:1. That's based on the latest study. Okay, so let's go to the complications. Blood-induced pro-inflammatory responses occurs in 10% of all transfusion. However, only less than 0.5% are serious. For the transfusion-related death, not TRALI or transfusion-related acute lung injury accounts for 16 to 22% of death. ABO, hemolytic transfusion reaction, most commonly due to wrong blood typing. No? Wrong blood typing, you mean to say you transfuse a wrong blood to a wrong patient. Okay, so what are the causes or instances wherein you can do that? It can lead to that. No, the most important is wrong identification. Okay, so meaning to say, you made the wrong labeling, you took blood from the wrong patient. No, it happens. It happens in emergency situation, especially in emergency situation, because some patients, when they go to the emergency room, some are unconscious. So if they are unconscious, you cannot talk to them. So you cannot verify the identity. Okay. And when you don't have the identity, you are prone, no, to give wrong blood. Okay. So even though the patient is conscious, some are careless, no, with the proper identification or labeling, no, so it can happen. Bacterial contamination of platelets, 11 to 18% can lead to death due to sepsis. Now, for the febrile non-hemolytic reaction, it's more than 1 degree centigrade body temperature. 1% of all transfusion can be greatly reduced with leukocyte-washed RBC. You can give acetaminophen. For the bacterial contamination of infused blood, this happens due to gram-negative blood capable of growth at 4 degrees centigrade. Okay? So platelets, they are prone, no, because they are stored at room temp. So fresh frozen plasma thawed in contaminated water, no, can also become contaminated. So if it results in sepsis, up to 25% can die. Okay, so once you identify the following symptoms: fever, chills, tachycardia, hypotension, GI symptoms, probably that patient is infected or in sepsis. So the immediate thing to do is to stop the blood transfusion right away. You send that blood to the laboratory for a blood culture to identify the offending microorganism. Okay, so you can give oxygen. No? The patient has difficulty breathing, adrenergic blocking agent. Then start your antibiotics right away. Allergic reactions. 1% of all transfusion consists of mild rash, urticaria, and flushing. In rare instances, anaphylactic shock develops. Transfusion of antibodies from a hypersensitive donor or transfusion of antigen, commonly related with fresh frozen plasma and platelets. Complications of transfusion occurs with rapid infusion of blood, plasma expanders, and crystalloids. So your TACO, no, your transfusion-associated circulatory overload. Okay, so this can happen if you infuse blood rapidly, plasma expanders, too much plasma expanders, and crystalloids. More common among the elderly with underlying heart disease. Manifested as rise in venous pressure, dyspnea, and cough. Ralphs can be heard at the lung bases. So when you say you have overloaded the circulation, so excessive fluid inside the body, so you can start diuresis, slow the rate of blood administration, and minimize fluid. For the TRALI, this is a non-cardiogenic pulmonary edema related to transfusion of transfusion-associated dyspnea and hypoxemia. Can occur with administration of any plasma containing blood product. So they can present as fever, rigors, bilateral pulmonary infiltrates on chest X-ray. Commonly occurs 1 to 2 hours after transfusion. Treatment is discontinuation of transfusion and pulmonary support. For the hemolytic transfusion reaction, can be acute or delayed. Occur with the administration of ABO incompatible blood, clerical error, immediate intravascular destruction of RBC, hemoglobinemia, hemoglobinuria are present. DIC can happen. Renal insufficiency due to free hemoglobin in the plasma can also happen. No? For the delayed, it occurs 2 to 10 days after transfusion. So as compared to the acute, this one has extravascular hemolysis, mild anemia, and hyperbilirubinemia. It occurs when an individual has a low titer. That's low titer at the time of administration. Pain at the site of transfusion, facial flushing, back and chest pain is present. This is an IgG-mediated immune response positive to Coombs test. So you can also transfuse the following diseases or the following viruses with your blood. Okay, so that ends the lecture. Do you have any question?
None so far po, Doc.
Okay, so well, the lecture was taken from your Swartz 11th edition. Okay, so you just have to read it again, to retain what we have discussed. Okay. Some part, especially the hemostasis, the coagulation pathway, you have to understand. Some are just only for memorization, at your level. Okay, so thank you everyone for